They say the kingdom of Lysoria vanished without a war, without a plague, without a scream. One day it was marked on maps. The next it was forgotten. But those who remember, quiet historians in candlelit monasteries, whispering librarians and forgotten wings, will tell you that Lysoria did not fall like other kingdoms. It faded slowly, like a dream slipping into shadow. And at the heart of its vanishing lay one decree: no laughter after sunset. Lysoria once sat nestled between blackened hills and mist-fed lakes, a realm neither large nor rich, but curiously adored by artists and pilgrims. Its capital, Varel, shimmered with stained-glass spires and arcaded courtyards, always perfumed by lavender smoke and painted with the fading gold of twilight. It was a city that adored beauty, but feared joy, or more precisely, feared joy at night. The origins of the decree are older than any written law, but most versions begin the same way, with a queen who laughed herself to death. Queen Aveline, her name alone draws silence in old books. They say she was born during an eclipse and crowned at 15. Her coronation accompanied by a flock of dead swans falling from the sky. Her smile, they claimed, could still a riot or summon storms. Poets adored her, courtiers feared her. And for one cruel summer, she laughed every night. Loud, hysterical laughter that echoed from the high towers of Lysoria, like the cry of something being torn apart. It began harmlessly, a new jester, a clever mirror, some joke about the sun, forgetting its way home. But the laughter grew darker, deeper. Servants claimed they heard her cackling alone in her chambers, speaking to shadows that answered back. The court physician begged her to rest, but she laughed in his face until he collapsed on the marble. On the 33rd night, she died in her sleep, or so they claimed. Her face, they said, was twisted in a grin so wide the flesh had torn at the edges of her mouth. A smile that never faded, a smile that seemed aware. The Council of Lysoria, in panic and shame, issued the Edict of Evening Silence. Henceforth, no citizen of the realm was to laugh after sunset, no jesters were allowed indoors, taverns closed before dusk. Even children were taught the posture of solemnity, not silence but restraint. Night, they said, belonged to other things. Things that mocked the shape of human joy, and to laugh at night was to invite them in. Over the years, the edict hardened into custom, and custom into instinct. Mothers hushed their sons before twilight. Lovers whispered through clenched teeth, and if one listened closely on the violet cobblestones of Varel at dusk, one might hear the last giggle of a child, smothered in his own hands. There are, of course, rumors that the law was not born of grief, but bargain. That Aveline's laughter was not madness, but possession. That something old and smiling came into the palace through her open mouth and never quite left. That it made itself at home in the cracks of the kingdom's joy. Every time someone laughed after dark, it remembered. In time, generations passed. The law was never questioned. It simply was. Like gravity, like the cold, till the reign of King Lysoria III, the quiet prince. He who would inherit the silence and unknowingly shatter it. This is his story. And the story of what happens when a kingdom forgets why it fears the dark. Lysoria was not born for a throne. He was the fifth son of a silent father and a mother who never spoke above a whisper. His siblings were bred for war, diplomacy, clergyage, given titles and armor and ancient names. But Lysoria was left with books and walls and silence. From the age of 3, he was tutored not in law or swordplay, but in stillness. His nursemaids taught him the art of quiet movement, of walking without echo. He learned to cry without sound, to think without speaking. On his 7th birthday, his gift was a black ribbon sewn into the collar of every roba, reminder that lips, like wounds, are best kept closed after dusk. He asked once, just once, why the night was so afraid of sound. The steward's answer was simple: because the sky listens. And so, Lysoria grew, pale, watchful, and terribly obedient. His only companion was a portrait oil painting on the east wall of the library, dusty and near forgotten. It depicted a young boy, perhaps his age, with a vivid crimson smile painted over his face. Not drawn with brush or skill, but smeared crudely across the mouth, There was no name, no plaque, only a single note etched into the frame in rusted ink. He smiled once, and the stars blinked. Luceta stared at that portrait often, and sometimes, when the sun fell and the servants dimmed the sconces, he could swear the red smile widened. The turning point came not with war or famine or omen, but with a guest. In the summer of his 16th year, a troop of performers arrived at the city gates, a wandering caravan of jesters, illusionists, and fire-breathers from beyond the hills. They claimed to hail from Valamor, a land that spoke no Lysorian tongue, and asked to entertain the court. Luteus, curious and untethered from protocol, pleaded with his father to let them stay. When for reasons no record explains, the king agreed. They performed at dusk. That detailed dusk is recorded in the diaries of 3 courtiers and 1 kitchen maid. The exact moment the sun touched the lake. Not before, not after, and in that fragile moment, between light and dark, the laughter began. Not the forced, masked laughter of nobles drunk on caution, but real laughter, full-throated, gasping, defiant. The kind of laughter that cracks porcelain masks and wakes forgotten bones. Luteus heard it from his high balcony and felt something inside him quake. Not fear, not joy, but something older. He descended the marble stair alone, his heart tight in his chest, and entered the hall just as a performer, woman in silver bells, finished her tale. She bowed, her voice still ringing in the rafters, and for a moment no one breathed. Then Luteus laughed. It was brief. A small, startled sound. But in the hush of Lysoria's laws, it was thunder, and everyone heard. Silence fell like ash. The guards froze. The king stood. The candles flickered. The silver-belled woman smiled. That night, the jester troupe was expelled before moonrise. Their wagons rolled out with wheels silenced by wet cloth. No goodbyes were spoken. The court never spoke of the incident again. But Luteus remembered. He began to question. Not aloud, never aloud, but in ink. In secret, he wrote letters to the Western archives. He visited the old nuns of the Pale Monastery, where books slept under chains. He found records sealed, brittle, dust-drapped of executions for laughter, of children vanished after sunset games, of faces stretched into smiles that would not fade. And he dreamed. Night after night, he dreamed of the boy in the painting, of laughter echoing through an endless marble hall, of something smiling through a crack in the ceiling, watching. The court noticed the change. He no longer dined, no longer walked the gardens. His eyes grew dark, his robes more plain. The people whispered. The quiet prince had become ... haunted. But Luteus had begun to understand. The law was not made to protect the people from chaos. It was made to protect the world from what their joy invited in. The portrait vanished on a Thursday. It was raining a slow, relentless drizzle that washed the cobblestones clean of ash and memory.
Ow.
Luteus entered the library as he always did, his steps as silent as moth wings. But the boy with the painted mouth was gone, not removed, not stolen, gone. The wall where the canvas had hung for decades showed no nail, no outline, no dust shadow, only smooth stone, impossibly bare. As if the painting had never existed. Luteus did not speak. He never did. That evening, he stood alone in the hall of mourning and old, forgotten chamber used once to display the masks of dead kings, and stared into the blackened mirrors that lined its walls. In there, in the third mirror from the left, he saw it. A mouth, not his own, not a reflection. Just a mouth wide red, wet, smiling back from the dark of the glass. No eyes, no face, just teeth. So many teeth. He did not scream. He could not. But he ran. From that night forward, Luteus stopped sleeping. His hands trembled during council. He whispered to shadows. He refused food, save for pomegranate seeds and watered wine. And most dangerously of all, he began visiting the common districts after dusk. The guards followed, of course. But he bribed them, threatened them, dismissed them. Sometimes he went alone, cloaked like a beggar, wandering through the alleys where laughter had not yet been bled from the stones. In those places, children still giggled behind closed shutters. Old men still dared to tell stories beneath low candlelight. They laughed softly, reverently, like people worshipping a forgotten god. One night in the quarter, known only as Ashward, Luteus heard it. A woman laughing, not with joy, not with humor, with hunger. Her voice was cracked, dry, full of broken notes and sharp edges. But it was laughter all the same. He followed it like a hound follows the scent of rot, until he came upon the door of a ruined chapel. No cross, no name, only a rusted knocker shaped like a tongue. He entered inside, no candles, only the faint glow of moss, and a circle of 7 figures in mourning veils, each facing inward. At the center, on a low stone table, lay the portrait. The boy, the smile. Only now, the red smear had dripped lower, staining the neck. Across the floor, drawn in chalk and something darker, were words in an alphabet he could not read, but somehow understood. Let the mouth open. Let the sky listen. Let the joy return. A woman turned to face him. Her veil fell. Luteus saw what the records never mentioned. Her face was blank. Smooth, empty. No eyes, no nose. No features at all, except for the mouth. Wide. Impossible. Smiling, she did not speak, only raised one hand and pointed to him. And in that moment, Luteus knew the truth. The law was not meant to guard against laughter. The law was meant to starve something that fed on joy after dark, that came not with screams but with chuckles, that smiled its way into the mouths of queens and children and kings. Something old, something patient, ran through rain and shadow until his lungs burned. He did not stop until he reached the palace gates. The guards stared as he collapsed, soaked and bleeding, and he finally told them what he had seen. They laughed. Not cruelly at all, just softly, unbelievingly, like men trying to brush off a nightmare. And in that moment, Luteus felt it. Something behind them, smiling. For 3 nights, the palace was silent again. The king, upon hearing of his son's apparent hysteria, waved it off as the indulgent paranoia of a book-stricken boy. He has too many pages in his head and not enough earth beneath his feet, he told the chamberlain. The queen said nothing at all. The court physician suggested laudanum and sleep, perhaps a change in diet. But Luteus refused all comfort. He neither slept nor ate. He merely sat in his chamber, motionless by the mirror, his breath fogging its surface in shallow rhythm, repeating one thought like a cracked bell tolling in his mind. I didn't laugh. Not really. On the 4th day, a feast was ordered. It was to be a display of strength and composure. Diplomatic dinner for the minor lords of the southern provinces. The court, desperate for the reestablishment of normalcy, welcomed the distraction. Invitations were inked in gold and sealed in wax, save for one strange line added beneath the heraldic stamp. No jests shall be spoken. No joy may be performed. No one questioned it. By then, obedience had become easier than thought. That evening, the great hall bloomed with soft candlelight and false cheer. Golden tablecloths fell in perfect drape over polished oak. Grapes glistened beside roasted fowl. Goblets were filled with red wine, the color of bruises, yet something vital was absent. There was no music, no lute, no song, only the shuffling of utensils, the low rustle of gowns and the clatter of formal restraint. Silence loomed heavy between every spoken word, like frost on glass. Luteus arrived late. His form had withered under the weight of sleepless nights, and his robes now hung from him like the skin of someone who had been forgotten by the sun. Yet when he entered, every face turned, and every conversation died mid-sentence. He took his place beside the king, eyes hollow, spine rigid. The king, attempting a smile that cracked halfway through, clapped his hands once. Let it be said, he declared with hollow pomp, that fear will not dine at our table. The moment his words fell, the curtains behind the halls, Dea stirred and she stepped out, the silver-belled woman. The same performer from 2 summers past. She looked unchanged, not older, not wearied by time or travel. Her smile shimmered as it had before, her hands still draped in lace like frost spun into cloth. She bowed low and spoke with a voice both soft and slicing. My lord, I bring no jest, only a tale. The king hesitated, visibly unsure for the first time in years. But pride, as it always does, won over caution. He nodded. She began. Her story was not quite a tale, not quite a parable. It felt more like remembering something terrible you had been trying to forget. She told of a village where mothers sang laughter to keep things away from the night. Of a child who never smiled until one day he did and never stopped. Of a mouth that grew larger than the boy's own face. She whispered of a kingdom long lost, where each subject bore a name composed of sounds, except one sound, a forbidden syllable so powerful it could act as a door. And someone, foolish or brave, had spoken it aloud. As she wove her tale, the great hall slipped deeper into stillness. The lords and ladies stopped eating. The wine remained untouched. Their eyes locked on her, glassy and wide. No one noticed they weren't blinking anymore. No one moved. And then, without warning, someone laughed. It came from Lord Felward, an old noble known for never smiling at weddings, even his own. The laugh was short, clipped but wrong, gurgling, as if pulled from the throat by unseen hooks. He clutched his chest, coughing, grinning. A moment later the queen began, soft giggle at first, which rapidly cracked into cackling. Her fork fell from her hand as her shoulders shook. Then the steward, then the footman, then a maid standing in the shadows, giggling so hard she collapsed into a chair. The hall was filled with laughter, wild, choking, unprovoked. Not laughter born of joy, but of compulsion, of command, like puppets jerking on invisible strings. Faces twisted, mouths tore. People laughed until they bled, and Lysoria did not laugh. He stood, slowly, while everyone else convulsed around him. And that's when he saw it. Above the grand banquet table, the chandelier began to bend. Not swing, not shake, but bend, its iron arms warping downward like wax under heat. Something had entered the room. It had no form, no face, no sound. But the space had changed. The very air had weight now, like stone laid upon the chest of a kingdom. The candlelight warped, casting shadows that did not match the bodies that made them. Hush. And behind the silver-belled woman still standing, still smiling, he saw the shape. Not a creature, not quite, a presence, a vastness. A smile made of dark. A hunger that had learned to wear a grin. She turned her head toward him. Her bells trembled, though she did not move. "It is fed now," she said, her voice no louder than a whisper in a crypt, but never full. Then she vanished, not in smoke, not in illusion. One moment she stood before them, then she was gone, like a candle blown out in the wind. And Lysoria remained alone in a hall of laughter, surrounded by noble mouths torn open by mirth they did not ask for. He understood now. The law had not been to ban laughter, it had been to withhold its offering, to starve something ancient, something that once fed would return, and it had. By morning, no one in the palace remembered the feast. Not the laughter, not the bending chandelier, not even the silver-belled woman. The queen returned to her embroidery as if her throat had not split from howling. The steward tallied menus for the following week. The guards resumed their dull patrols with blank expressions and steady boots. When Lysoria, pale and silent, confronted his father in the solar, the king merely frowned and said, "You had a bad dream." Then he dismissed him with a gentle wave of the hand, as if waving away smoke. But the great hall was different. Subtly, the air was cooler, the candelabras burned shorter, the portraits, those proud, stiff ancestors that lined the walls, had all begun to smile. Lysoria returned to the library. Not for comfort, not for books, but for the cracks. The room had changed. Silence was no longer passive. It watched. He traced his fingers along the base of the eastern wall, where the painting had once hung. The stone was smooth, almost too smooth. Beneath it, he heard a sound, distant, rhythmic. A pulse. He summoned no servants. He carried no torch. He simply pressed his ear to the marble and whispered, "Open." The stone shifted. It did not grind, or creak, or crumble. It simply became something else, something hollow. A panel folded inward, and behind it, a staircase descended into black. Lysoria did not hesitate. The steps led downward for far too long. Longer than the foundations of the palace should have allowed. The air grew thick, metallic. The smell of old laughter hung in the dark, sour, burnt, familiar. He descended with one hand grazing the wall and the other clutching a small brass key he had taken years ago from the librarian's desk and never returned. A key with no known lock until now. At the bottom, a chamber waited. No torches lit the space, yet he could see everything dimly, as if illuminated by memory alone. The walls were carved from a stone not native to Lysoria, smooth and dark, veined with faint lines that pulsed like veins under skin. In the center stood a house. It's a perfect replica of the royal palace, but small enough to fit within a courtyard. A child's model, complete in every detail, except for the faces painted in the windows. They were not still. He turned to watch him. He approached. The key in his hand grew warm. The miniature front door of the model house had no handle, only a small slit carved into the wood. With trembling fingers, he slid the key inside. The house began to laugh. It was not loud. It was not sudden. It was slow, layered, mechanical, a chorus of invisible mouths exhaling delight from deep within its tiny walls. The sound filled the chamber without echo, pressing against the skin like heat. Luteus stepped back, and the floor beneath his feet changed. It became teeth. Stone teeth arranged in a perfect circle around the house. As if the entire chamber were the mouth of something vast, waiting. The walls pulsed faster. A single word echoed inside his skull, not spoken, but felt. Remember, he staggered. Memories not his own flooded him. Queen cackling in her sleep, her hair soaked in blood. Jester hanging by his heels, giggling as his skin peeled away. Children with mouths sewn shut, smiling with their eyes. The painted boy, now alive, grinning in a cradle as the nursemaid wept silently beside him. He understood this was not history. This was rehearsal. The law had never been about preventing laughter. It had been about rehearsing restraint, about teaching a kingdom to suppress the one sound that could summon the thing beneath. And over time, the people forgot why, but the ritual remained. And now, someone had fed it. He turned to flee, but the doorway had vanished. No stairs, no wall, only more black stone closing in. And from the center of the tiny palace, the laughter rose again, higher, layered with voices that mimicked his own. Luteus fell to his knees and clutched his ears, but it echoed inside the bone. Then came the sound of footsteps behind him. He turned, and the boy was there, the one from the portrait, his face unchanged, his smile still red, still too wide. But now he moved. He walked with the delicate grace of a prince long dead. When he opened his mouth to speak, the words came from all directions at once. "We've missed you," Luteus tried to run, but his body no longer listened. The air was too heavy. The stone beneath him too soft. And in that last moment, before the darkness pulled him under, he realized the truth. Lysoria had not forgotten. Lysoria had obeyed. And now, the mouth had opened again. When Luteus awoke, it was day, but the light was wrong. It's not golden, not silver, but a pale gray that seemed scraped from beneath a corpse's fingernails. He lay not in the chamber beneath the library, but in his own bed, under silken sheets now soaked with sweat. The mirror across the room had been turned to face the wall. Servants refused to meet his eyes. No one asked where he had been, no one dared. The silence had thickened in the palace, taking on a texture like velvet soaked in oil. Every voice became careful, every gesture stiff. The laughter had not returned, but its memory lingered in every corner, like perfume clinging to an empty dress. Luteus rose and walked the corridors alone. Guards stepped aside. Chambermaids curtsied without breath. He was not the prince anymore. He was something else. Something watched. He demanded an audience with the king. They met in the solar, beneath a ceiling of painted constellations that no longer matched the stars. The king sat in a heavy chair carved from bonewood, sipping tea from a cracked cup as if nothing had changed. His eyes were pale, his hair thin, and his face, Luteus noticed, was smiling. Not fully, just the corners, just enough. "You went too far," the king said without looking up. "You followed the noise below the world. You fed what must starve." "I tried to stop it," Luteus replied, his voice hoarse. "But I understand now. We made a bargain." The king finally looked at him. His eyes were bloodshot and wet. "Not we," he whispered. "She did." And then he told the story, the part that had never been written, never allowed to be etched in records or poems. What had been Queen Aveline, who made the first offering, when her infant son died without breath. In her grief, she wandered the halls for 13 nights, praying, weeping, howling with laughter to keep herself from collapsing. On the 14th night, something answered. Something in the mirror. It offered her a trade, the life of the boy, for the sound of joy. Not all joy, just laughter, and only at night, a simple exchange. The boy returned to life, but he was not the same. His laughter was cold, his smile too large. He died again weeks later, and the queen soon followed, her throat ripped open from the inside. As if something inside her had tried to crawl out, the court concealed it. They buried the story, sealed the nursery, and issued the Edict of Evening Silence. Over time, it became law. Then legend, then superstition. But the thing in the mirror remained, waiting. Luteus listened in stillness. His skin felt tight, as though it no longer fit. He looked at his father and saw the cracks the way his hands trembled when he reached for the tea, the way his mouth twitched in moments of silence. "How long have you heard it?" The king's voice dropped to a rasp. "Every night since she died, it speaks and smiles. It waits behind glass. It sees us when we grin." Luteus stood and walked toward the mirror. It had been draped in black velvet since his boyhood, but now he pulled the cloth away. For a moment, there was only his reflection, drawn, pale, thin. And then the smile began. Not his own. It came from the reflection, slowly, inch by inch, stretching wider than a man's mouth should stretch. Behind it, a second mouth opened. Not a copy, a presence. The king shouted something, but Luteus didn't hear. The mirror was humming now low, guttural, like the throat of an animal too large to name. And within it, faces began to gather, grinning, silent, overlapping. The boy from the painting, the queen, the jester, 1,000 others, all waiting. Luteus reached forward and touched the glass. The world bent. For a heartbeat, all of Lysoria vanished. He stood in a void of mirrors, each one reflecting not himself, but a different version, a laughing prince, a screaming prince, a prince whose mouth had been sewn shut. And in the center, the mirror that was not a mirror, a doorway, circular, rimmed with teeth, made of polished bone. "Close it," the king screamed, pulling him back. The mirror cracked. A fine line down the center, and the laughter began. Again, not in the hall, not in the castle, but in the sky. It rippled across the firmament like thunder made of breath. Luteus fell to his knees. The king collapsed beside him, clutching his chest. And the mirror continued to crack slowly, deliberately like a mouth prying itself open. The first to vanish was the palace bell. At precisely 7 minutes past sunset, the great bronze bell in the North Tower, cast a century earlier in the name of Queen Aveline herself, ceased to exist. It did not fall. It did not rust or melt, simply vanished. One moment it hung there, framed in dusk. The next, there was nothing but a cold chain swaying in the wind, chiming with a phantom note no one had struck. The monks in the clock cloister reported the anomaly with unnerving calm. "It's the hour," one said. "We always lose something when the mouth begins to open." That was the phrase they used now, the mouth. No longer a myth, no longer a metaphor. It had become the name of their undoing. And the hour returned each night. 7 minutes past sunset. Then the ink vanished. Books began to lose their words. Entire pages turned blank in the royal archive. First it was poems like "Careless Things," then sermons, then treaties, then the records of birth and death. Names disappeared from the census. Paintings began to peel their own faces. Documents turned to dust when touched. It was as though the kingdom itself had begun forgetting how to speak, how to remember, how to be. The streets of Varel grew quiet. Doors closed before dusk. Windows were covered in heavy cloth. The blacksmith sharpened no blades. The baker refused to light his ovens. And though the guards still walked the ramparts, they spoke only in gestures, fearful that any syllables spoken after the bell's silence might be mistaken for joy. Luteus roamed through it all, sleepless, voiceless. His eyes were bloodshot from searching. His feet bled beneath silk slippers never meant for stone. He did not eat, he did not weep. He only studied the mirrors. He found them everywhere now. Not just in the palace, in puddles, in windows. in the silvered backs of spoons. They all showed the same thing, his reflection, smiling without him. It taunted, it waited. It whispered behind the glass, not in words, but in hunger. He would lift a hand and it would delay by half a second. He would frown and it would continue to grin. In desperation, he summoned the council. All what remained of it. 3 of the original 13 were still sane. The rest had fled, or worse, had begun to laugh at nothing. He stood before them in the echoing hall of names, where every ruler's title was once etched into a golden frieze. Half of the names had melted now, the letters dripping downward like candle wax. Still, he spoke. There is no kingdom anymore, only a mouth and the memory of what it's tasted. The chancellor, old and blind in one eye, raised his voice with the dry crackle of parchment. Then we must silence it. Sever the tongue from its throne, burn the glass, bury the name. But the name could not be buried, because the name was theirs. Lysoria. They had all said it, loved it, sang it. The mouth had fed on every echo. It was never the laughter that called it tit, was the naming. The joy of saying what one is. The kingdom had worshipped its own beauty for too long. Now it was being devoured by that adoration. That night, the moon did not rise. Only a long curve of shadow in the sky, arched like a grin across the stars. People stared from rooftops, and the rooftops collapsed. Mothers held children close, and the children began to hum songs they had never been taught. 1,000 windows cracked inward. Wells refused to show reflections. The air became thick with a sweetness that stank of rot and roses. And at 7 minutes past sunset, the gates of Varel vanished. Gone. Not destroyed, not broken, just not there. The wind howled where the gates had stood. Behind it, black hills shimmered with unnatural motion, like something vast was moving beneath their skin. Lysoria stood atop the western tower and watched as the city folded upon itself street by street, memory by memory. He could no longer hear the cries of the people. Only the distant sound of muffled giggles, layered and endless, like a theater that had forgotten how to end the show. He turned away from the city and whispered into the broken night. "What do you want?" The answer came not in voice, but in cold understanding. To be remembered, to be fed, to wear your joy as skin. He bowed his head. He understood now what had to be done. At the heart of the palace, beneath a ceiling painted with stars that no longer existed, Lysoria stood alone in the throne chamber. The marble floor had split in 3 directions. Dust hung in the air like ash from an invisible fire. The golden tapestries wept dark stains. He no longer wore the robes of a prince, nor the crown of a son. What adorned his shoulders now was a shroud, the black velvet cloth once used to cover the royal mirrors, now draped around him like mourning given form. Before him stood the mirror of lineage. It had once reflected the coronation of every Lysorian king, each bowing to their own image in solemn pride. But now it was no longer glass. It rippled like oil, the surface breathed. And behind it shapes swam, grinning shapes, countless mouths, some human, some not, stacked and writhing in joyless delight. They opened, one by one, and the air filled with the hum of an ancient hunger. Lysoria stepped closer. His face, pale and sharp like moonlight carved into bone, did not reflect. The mirror no longer mimicked, it watched. And waiting within it, at the center of that sea of mouths, was the boy. Still painted, still smiling. But now he whispered. Lysoria could not hear the words, not truly, but he knew what they meant. There were no bargains left, no seals to be broken, no laws to be written. The edict had never been about control. It had been a lullaby. A superstition wrapped around the truth like gauze around a wound that could not heal. They had fed the thing by fearing it. And now, the only way to end it was to make it choke. He removed the shroud from his shoulders and dropped it at his feet. Beneath it, he held something wrapped in leather, the old portrait torn from its frame, now cracked and curling with age. He held it up to the mirror. The boy's painted mouth began to bleed, not red, not wet, but dark as shadow bleeding from memory itself. The mirror shuddered. "I am not afraid," Lysoria said, his voice flat, brittle. "I do not laugh. I do not smile. I do not name you." the mirror hissed. The room around him cracked. The mouths began to chant not in sound, but in movement. The walls pulsed like lungs. Air thickened with pressure that made the nose bleed, the teeth ache. Lysoria stepped forward and placed the portrait against the mirror. And then, slowly, deliberately, he did the one thing no Lysorian had done in 200 years. He smiled, not a grin, not a giggle, true smile, small, human. Forgiving, the mirror shrieked. The mouths screamed without voice, their forms twisting inward. The boy clawed at the barrier, his hands blackening into smoke. The mirror cracked not in lines, but in shatters of memory. Faces peeled away. Laughter turned to silence. The walls of the chamber splintered, and beyond them, the sky folded like paper on fire. Lysoria stood at the center of the storm, his eyes unblinking, his smile steady. And then, everything stopped. No noise, no air, no palace, no kingdom, just stillness, and then light. But not sunlight. Memory light, you see. Lysoria did not fall in fire. It did not crumble under siege. It was not buried by time. It was forgotten, erased, not from maps, but from the heart. One by one, its names faded from books, from songs, from lineage. No traveler ever reached its gates again, because no road led there. No merchant recalled its coins. A child dreamed of its towers. But sometimes, at dusk, if one walks far enough from the edge of a village and listens not with the ears, but with something deeper, there comes a sound. Soft, dry. Like a smile brushing against the skin of the world. And if you hear it whatever you do, don't laugh. Not after dark, because the mouth never closes. It only waits.